What's up, y'all? Welcome back to Fish the Moment live stream number 60. Today I'm joined by Matt Pangrac from Bass Talk Live BTL, and he's going to be breaking down his tournament on Sam Rayburn Lake, the Bassmaster Open. He had really good finish, finished in the top 40 out of 200 something boats, so really good finish. Matt, how's it going tonight?
Good. You've done 60 live streams already, John.
60 live streams.
That's a lot of information.
Yeah, it's been really good. People seem to enjoy it. Bunch of people. We have regulars on. We got Ernest, Timo, Ron, Christian, Aaron, Dave, Dean. Got guys who are always just like 20 minutes early sitting here waiting. I'm sure it's like that for BTL too, right?
Yep. Yeah, we got the guys who don't miss a show. It's awesome.
That's cool. Well, man, I'm a huge fan of BTL. I'm sure a lot of the guys here are listening to that as well. If you guys aren't listening to Bass Talk Live, go download it on the podcast app and listen to it while you're driving to the lake. It's like the best show. It's like an hour long, which is perfect for any drive. Like for me, I listen to it when I go to Grand or 10 Killer or whatever, and it's just perfect. So
awesome.
Big fan. Cool.
Good
deal. Matt, let's just jump straight into it because there's a lot to break down. We actually did a prep video. We actually were having you prep for the event, and if there's a bunch of interest from you guys on that, we did Randy's prep video. Didn't seem like it got that big of a response, so if you guys are interested in seeing how Matt prepared for this tournament, his strategy and stuff, let me know because I have the video. We can just post it. But what we want to do is kind of go over a recap of the event in general as well as Matt's specific strategy, because he kind of did something very unique, which I think is going to be really interesting for you guys. He kind of fished the biggest community hole in the most obvious spot on the lake, and no one was fishing it because it was almost like it was too obvious, which is really, really cool because when you hear about Jacob Wheeler talk or all these guys, Jacob's literally taking the wrap off of his boat, trying to idle the most sneaky, unobvious stuff to find fish, and yet you're able to just go to the community holes and catch them. It's super cool.
Yeah, was it Rodney Dangerfield who said, and I think the quote, I'm going to mess the quote up, Johnny, but the quote is something like, the place is always so crowded that nobody goes there anymore. I think I ended up in one of those situations in this tournament, a little bit, to where I fully expected there to be 8 to 10 boats in my starting area, and there were like 2.
Really? Man.
Yeah.
That's crazy. And you did something that you said you were not going to do. You swore it off on BTL in our video. You're like, I am not going to fish grass. You said you've caught literally 0 fish punching grass before in a tournament. It was not what you were going to do, and that's how you caught most of your fish. Tell us how that happened.
Yeah, so I went into this tournament, and the only experience I'd had on Sam Rayburn, being from Oklahoma, was I had covered I covered Bass Fest, the Elite Series tournament, with my job there with the Bass Zone. I think that was back in 2015, so I've covered a couple big tournaments there, not fishing, and then I fished in the Costa Series, which is now the Toyota Series, last June. But last June, it was 6 foot high. And I went to that tournament knowing nothing about the lake. And I mean, I knew that there were some places you shouldn't run. And I remember I called Brad Hallman before the tournament, and I said, how do you run this thing, blah, blah, blah. And he said, well, it's 6 foot high, treat it like Grand. So I just ran wherever I wanted to. Black Forest, Amber Forest didn't make any difference to me. So I spent that entire tournament above the what is it? The 147. What is the name of that bridge?
Right by Castle Boykin, above the bridge.
Right above the bridge there by Castle Boykins. In the deer stand area and Pofers and the canyons. And I'd never seen them at normal pools, so I didn't know what they looked like or anything. I just started flipping, and I got on like a pattern with hardwoods and totally avoided any grass, and grass didn't really play. And I had a top 10 in that coast. Actually finished 8th place there, like standing in line next to Dickie Newberry going, what the heck am I doing here? But it worked out really good, and I had a big bite each day, and I understood it. So I had a lot of positive momentum going in. Was not planning on fishing grass because I just don't have much experience at it. And it became really apparent when I got here for this practice. My game plan was to go shallow, and like I talked with you a little bit about, kind of flip some isolated stuff and do the same, because people were like, oh, there's still stuff in the water in the canyons and stuff. And I went into the canyons and I was like, this stuff's like a foot deep. It's hard to get to. It just looks kind of junky. Like, it wasn't going that great. So I went out and I started graphing. I found some brush piles. And I got a couple bites out of brush piles, but nothing that I felt like super confident on. And then it was like every place had tons of boats out there on the brush piles. And I was seeing a lot of Texas anglers. There were 104 anglers in this field from Texas. So, I mean, there were a lot of good anglers in this. It's like 220 boat field. And I was like, man, these brush piles are getting a lot of pressure too. So I did that for a couple of days. And I actually kind of stayed around my familiar zone. And I ended up over in Deer Stand, which is where I caught a lot of those fish when the water was up, because I knew it had a good population over there. And I found some brush piles and some standing timber that I could get big cranking in. But as the practice went on, I was like, man, it didn't feel like it was consistent, like it was a sure thing. You know what I mean? Like I could crank a DT 14 or a DT 16 through the tops, and when I caught one, it'd be a 2.5 pounder or a 3 pounder. But it was like you never knew what brush pile. It wasn't like, oh, I can roll up to this one and catch it in there, or this one and catch it. And then you had to find them, and it was really time consuming. So I just didn't have a ton of confidence in that. And I was like, I could see myself in the first morning, and I try to do a lot of visuals. Like, can I see myself rolling into this and it working up? And I'm like, no, I see myself rolling into this and like losing 3 crankbaits, not having anything at 10 o'clock and going, oh, crap. So I looked in Veach, and I had talked to a couple of people who were like, man, you know, if you want to look at the grass, there's good grass in Veach. There's good grass in this area. So I went and I looked in Veach on like the second day of practice, which would have been Monday. There were like 70 boats in that place, man. It was absolutely slam packed. And there was like a channel swing place that I wanted to look at, and there were like 6 boats on it. And I remember just thinking like, this place is going to be trash by the time the tournament comes. But it's Sam Rayburn, and you know the fish are there. You know the fish are in the grass. So the more I started thinking about it, I was kind of like, man, I wanted to avoid the grass, but I just could not feel comfortable in the brush piles. So I decided to go back and look in the grass the day, which would have been Tuesday, and actually got a couple bites out of it, which kind of opened my mind. I was like, well, maybe I could do a combination instead of shallow fishing and brush pile fishing. I'd found a couple brush piles that I thought had some pretty decent fish because I kind of visited them once or twice and got bit. I was like, well, if I could find something in the grass and then the brush piles, I might be able to put together a limit. And that's how it ended up happening in the tournament for me.
Got it. That's really cool. And that's what a lot of guys predicted before the tournament, that you had to mix the shallow and the offshore. As it turned out, the offshore bite was really strong. And actually, you were in the same areas like Daryl Gleason and the winner from Japan. Mm-hmm. When you look back at it, Josh Douglas, yeah, all those guys were. When you went and actually like reviewed how everyone was fishing, were you a little bit, I guess, disappointed that you didn't try to push that brush pile bite a little bit further? And like, because they were running 30, 40, 50 brush piles a day.
No, not at all. Daryl Gleason, and I saw him in practice a couple days. You know, talked to him at the ramp and things like that. And I mean, that guy was out there to idle brush piles, and if he caught 7 pounds a day, he was going to do it fishing brush piles. And if he caught 27 pounds a day, he was going to do it fishing brush piles. And the same went for Josh Douglas and a number of those guys at the top. And I just wasn't willing. I mean, there were a lot of guys that were in this area that did the exact same thing they did that didn't catch crap.
Yeah.
I mean, they struggled. They struggled to catch fish. And my whole philosophy has been like, just stay in it long enough to have a chance.
Yeah.
And like I'm 25th in the points now, but like if I had a bad day, I was done. Like I'm waiting until 2021 for the Bassmaster Open. So, and I just never got the confidence, except in about 3 or 4 different brush piles and I visited them consistently, and they were brush piles that I never saw anyone else on, and they were a little bit shallower, which is interesting because you take the social media, you take everything that happened. A lot of those guys that caught them were like, yeah, I caught them on the shallower brush.
Yep.
Even like 8 to 12 foot, which was a mistake I made because I didn't even look that shallow. I started catching them in like 14 to 16 foot brush piles and was like, magic depth. So then I dropped and didn't look anything deeper. I should have even looked shallower. But I only had like 4 or 5 ones that were shallow that I had confidence in, but not enough that I thought I could catch a limit offshore on any brush piles. I ended up catching one that I weighted on the first day off of a pile, and it was a 5 5.9, 5.8. And then the very next drop, I hooked another 5 that I lost right at the side of the boat. And then the second day, actually started on that stuff. I lost a big one, broke it off in the brush pile right off the start, caught 2 shorts, went and punched 2 out of the grass, and then came back and caught a third one out of the brush. So I literally had 2 stretches of grass and 5 brush piles. And I took any other question out of any other option out of the equation. And I said, it's Sam Rayburn. I believe there are 5 good fish between these 2 stretches of grass and these 5 brush piles, and I don't need to even look anywhere else. So I took any decision making out of the equation and said, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen in one of these 5 spots.
You talked about that a lot in our prep video, how you like to really eliminate options for yourself. And I think that's one thing that a lot of guys listening to the stream can learn from, is that you don't give yourself the entire lake as an option or every single pattern is an option. You go out after your practice or during your practice to eliminate pretty much everything. I think the way you said is like, it's your strategy for how not to suck in tournaments. Like, you might not win every tournament, but you're not going to have a 150th, 200th place finish. And I feel like that's really important. Can you explain that concept a little bit more to everyone?
Yeah, I mean, technically that's not right, because you can really easily have 150 or 200 place finish here, because a lot of your decision making is in which, you can't sample everything, because if you get bit doing everything, now you're back to square one. Like, everything is still in play, right? You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
You get bit doing 10 things and you had 10 things on your front deck. Now, like, where are you after practice? Because you still have 10 options.
Yep.
So I like to try to eliminate options, because knowing me, if things don't go right, I'm going to start chasing things that happen. And if I don't know what to chase or where to go, I'll stay. And when you're staying somewhere, you're fishing. And when you're fishing, you have a chance to catch a fish.
Yeah.
So I try to spend whatever it is, 1 day of practice, 2 days of practice, 3 days of practice, finding something that I'm comfortable with, that I believe that I can catch 5 in, and then learning it as well as I can. And I don't know if this is right or wrong. This is just the way I do it. I like to revisit spots like every day. Like, okay, for example, I started punching grass, and the first place I went was a beach, which had a bunch of grass in it. So I wanted to look for something that was a little bit different, because I talked to Brad Hallman. I said, hey, if I'm going to punch grass, what do you want? He's like, man, you got to find something different. I remember listening to Todd Fairclough say, whenever you get a bite, hit a waypoint. Once you get 10 bites, you'll start seeing clusters together. You'll say, hey, that's a juice bank. That's not a juice bank. There's just 1 here. There were 3 here. So I fished grass for like 3 hours down a stretch, and I ended up towards the back of the beach. There were a couple little stretches where the channel kind of swung in close, and it had a hard edge, and I got bit there. And it made sense to me. Punching with a big bite baits BFE and a 3/4 or a 1 ounce weight, it made sense to me. And it helped, because 10 minutes after I started punching, I caught a 4-pounder. And then I caught a 2-pounder, and then I shook some off, and then I caught another keeper. So I was like, okay, this makes sense to me. So I had seen how the brush piles were getting pounded and how they work, but I was like, man, there's a lot of fish that could live in this grass that wouldn't get pounded. So I had comfort with that. But here's what I did then. I kept going back to that. So that was I think that was actually Monday, because I remember I went back twice. So I went back in there Tuesday, and I got bit, but I didn't set the hook, and I shook it off. And then I was like, well, I wonder if they'll bite in the morning back in there. So instead of trying to find grass all over the lake and try to expand that pattern, I'm trying to dial in a small area in the back of each where the best areas are. Because we're Sam Rayburn, remember? There's fish everywhere on this lake. So then Wednesday morning, I said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start back there punching grass, because I feel really confident that if they're there, they'll bite, but I don't know enough about grass if they bite in the morning. So I go back in there in 10 minutes, I shake 3 off. No one's back in there in beach right now. So now I know I've got my starting spot, and I've got tons of confidence in it. Because even though I've never punched grass, and I've never seen this area before in my life, 3 days in a row, at different times of the day, I've been able to go in there and get a bite within 10 minutes.
That's super cool.
That's how I gained confidence in that. So when I went back in there, and then I had another area, so like the channel swung close up against the bank, and I got bit there. So I was like, well, where else can it? So I looked at my Navionics chip, and I'm looking at it, and I'm like, well, there's a, I don't know if I'm in the right.
You're in Harvey right now.
Yeah, I'm in Harvey, so I need to go down to Veach. So the channel swings right close to the bank, right? So I'm looking. So then I went and I spent a couple hours over here because it looked like the channel swung back in this side. And I know this is all stuff that guys fish a lot. I mean, it's nothing. I mean, I expected there to be a ton. And I saw that the channel came back here. So I went and I looked back here. And I went in the very back here because I saw where the channel swung in this corner here. And I started looking. And then I went in this next little pocket. And I said, there it is right there. And the channel kissed up against the bank there. Very similar to the way that it did down here. And I got bit here and I got bit here. Didn't get bit. I had like one bite over here, but no clusters. I had a cluster here and I had a cluster here. So those were my 2 grass banks. And I didn't try to look for anything else. And I said, I know there's 5 fish in this 100-yard stretch and 5 fish in this 100-yard stretch. So I was totally confident when I was running. I had no decision to make. I was just going to one spot, and if someone was in that spot, I'd go to the other spot. So I took the decision-making out. There were tons of stuff over in this big, giant area here. Dude, I never even went in there. I have like no idea what was in there. Like, I have no idea where else there was grass on the lake. Like, I didn't look in Caney. I didn't look down south. I didn't look anything. I just knew I had those 2 little stretches. Took the decision making out because I was comfortable that there were fish in that.
Well, I think that's really insightful too, because when I go fishing, even like I do these shallow versus offshore challenges with Randy, and we go fishing, and I go to a lake, where I haven't maybe been there for 3 weeks, 2 months, a year even, and I have to try to find offshore fish, and Randy has to try to find shallow fish. And what we find is that especially for me, whenever I start catching fish, as soon as I get a single bite or maybe a couple bites in an area, I will then say, I'm not going to move more than 200 yards from where I caught these fish. And I'm going to find every single piece of cover. Because usually if you can catch, like let's say 2 fish out of a brush pile, if you can find any other brush pile in that same depth with the same contour elements, you have a good chance of catching more fish. And that's what happened here with your grass. If you look where you are in Veach, you stayed within maybe a 200 to maybe 200 yard to half mile section. And if you go another mile away, maybe those fish aren't setting up in that same depth on that same type of grass, and you have to re-establish that pattern. I think that's really cool because then you maximize that. And if you're getting 4 bites per spot, even if you have 2 or 3 spots, that's enough. And I think that's one thing that a lot of guys mess up on in tournaments especially, is that one, the second you leave an area, you have to relearn it, which means you start your whole day's worth of understanding over, and you're running to an area where maybe someone else has already fished it or done whatever. A lot of times it's better to just pick a 200-yard, 300-yard stretch and fish there. And you talk about that on Grand as well all the time. Like, find that area, fish that area, and that's it. Don't go anywhere else.
Yeah, well, the key is don't go anywhere else as long as you believe that those fish live there, which is why I'm going back and revisiting it at different times of the day, different sunlight, cloudy, windy, calm. Like if I'm consistently getting bit, that's developing my confidence in an area. It's not like, hey, I got bit here and I'm not going to adjust, I'm not going to change, and I'm not going to search during the day.
Yeah.
Like, I stayed there because I never had that hopeless feeling. You ever had that hopeless feeling where you're like, you're like flipping and you're like, well, I don't know what else to do, so I guess I'll stay here. But this place sucks, and I don't feel like I'm going to get a bite here or anything. Like, I maximized those areas, and I did that with the brush piles over by the bridge too that I felt were productive, because I always felt like I had a chance to get bit out of it. And that's what I search for, is a chance to feel like I'm fishing productive water. And I would rather refish productive water that I feel like is productive, whether it is or not. It's a confidence thing for me. I would rather refish water that I feel like is productive than randomly fish water where I don't have a feeling like it's productive. And sometimes you can fish new water and feel like it's totally productive. It's just in this instance, on this lake with a fish population and as pressured as it got with a big field coming off of a holiday weekend, I was happy as long as I was fishing somewhere where I felt like I was being productive, and it just happened to be those 2 little stretches.
When you establish there's a school of fish there, when you get 3 bites out of a stretch of grass, you know there's a school of fish there. And one thing I talk about all the time in my videos is feeding windows. There's little 2-hour or 45-minute windows throughout the day where those fish are going to start chewing. Like, let's say a front moves through, the wind starts blowing on that grass, you might absolutely wreck them down that stretch if you're there in that moment. But then you might go 3 hours without a bite, but that school of fish isn't gone anywhere. It's still there. It's just it's not actively feeding at that moment. So again, this is, I think for a lot of guys, this is one of the most beneficial tips if you're struggling to tournament fish, is to not fish the entire lake. You can't be successful unless you have a ton of experience. If you're like a local, like a Daryl Gleason, who knows where all these different areas are, and maybe he knows that in this section of the lake, over by the mouth of Veach, you can catch him in 20-foot brush piles. Then over in the Black Forest, you can catch him in 14-foot brush piles. Then over in north of the bridge, you can catch him in 8-foot brush piles. Unless you dial that in, it's so hard in even a 3-day practice to get that dialed. Unless you're local again. So
so I've spent between the Coastal last year and the Bassmaster Open this year, I had 4 days, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 13 days on Sam Rayburn. This is bad. I've never made a cast below Veach except like with 5 minutes left right by the ramp, and I have never made a cast above the split in the like above deer stand.
Yep.
So every single cast I've ever made in 13 days has been between deer stand and Veach. Like, I don't even know what the rest of the lake looks like.
Well, that's good because Sam Rayburn's huge. I mean, if you go into the other arm, it's a completely different lake almost, with different types of vegetation, everything. It's like you have to relearn. I mean, I know a lot of guys who fish small lakes and stuff, they understand this. They're like, when they go to a big lake, it's so overwhelming because Sam Rayburn is literally 10 lakes in one a lot of times. That's the same thing with Table Rock, the same thing with Grand. The fish don't act the same all over the lake. They act the same in every mile stretch.
No, and one of the things you talk to like these experts on the lake, we actually had Matt Reed on, who's really good on Sam Rayburn and those Texas lakes, and he talked about learning the lake in chunks, right? That, if you're going out for a weekend and you want to run past the 103 bridge one day and then fish down by the dam the next day, like, you're not really going to learn anything. And he's like, you have to learn the lake in chunks. And I think it's interesting. When I first started fishing Grand, it was back in, I moved to Oklahoma in the mid 2000s. I got the bug. I started fishing Grand in like 2008, 2009. And I've started fishing the nickels. 1-day events, you win a boat for first, seconds, 10 grand, rest of the payout, like, you get your money back. And I remember Mark Jeffries from BTL was like, dude, you can never compete with those, with those guys down there. You'll never, Alan Head, Gary Carrier, Sean Goo, and all those guys. Like, you can't do that. You're driving 3 hours, staying at a hotel, fishing the thing for 3 days. Like, those guys have 30 years of experience. And it kind of ticked me off. So I started going down there, and one thing like that time, so like that mid 2009 to 2013, 14, before that ramp was built in Wolf Creek, like, everything was one down lake. That was before the zebra mussels had gotten in there for a couple years and stuff. And I was like, okay, well, why would you fish up lake for 15 pounds when almost everything is one mid down with 22 to 25 pounds? And it's a 1-day tournament. So I just started learning like little codes and little things in there to where I would spend like 3 or 4 days in like one cut.
Yeah.
And side image it and fish it and learn it really well. Because, I mean, on Grand, it was the same as that. The fish population, it's different now, but the fish population then, it's like, okay, there's 5 5-pounders in here. And if you can learn this and turn this into a pond, who cares what's in the rest of the lake? If you get good in this and treat this cove like nothing else exists, you can compete with anybody who knows 60,000 acres because 5,000 acres. And if they're in your 5,000 acres, it doesn't matter how well you know the other 55.
Oh, yeah.
You just have to pick the right stuff. So, and then it's easy because you don't have any decisions. You're not like running and you're like, oh my God, this thing is so big. You're just like, yeah, I'm going to that cut, that creek arm. I'm going to learn it. And then you learn it, and you're like, oh, yeah, I get bit here, and I get bit here, and they use this, and there's a channel edge here. And now you take something that's massive, and you've shrunk it down, it's like going to a pond.
Exactly. I mean, that's what I used to do when I used to fish tournaments all the time on Lake Dardanelle, and I was like a local basically down there. I ran with like the top 8 or 9 guys down there. And when I would fish out there was guys that could run up to Spadger, which is way up the river, shallow, dirty water. There's guys who fish in the creeks. There's guys who fish down by the Illinois Bayou, lower into the lake. What I decided is I'm going to learn 2 areas of the lake, and those are the only 2 areas I'm going to learn to fish. And I'm going to learn Delaware Bay and Piney Bay because it gets less pressure than the other places, and I'm just going to fish it. And I won a lot of tournaments, a lot of Tuesday nighters, a lot of stuff like that, fishing against the locals because I just learned that area so well. And I knew that in those 2 areas there's big fish, just like you said. And I just learned them. And yeah, the fish were different every time when I would go there. I had to use different techniques. I had to fish shallow, deep, everything. But I never went anywhere else. And to this day, there's areas in Lake Dardanelle I've never been to, despite being my home lake. And I've heard that from a lot of guys on Sam Rayburn, even like Todd Castledine. Sam Rayburn, local, knows everything. He said for this tournament, he practiced in a creek that he'd never been to in his life. How can you have a creek on Rayburn you've never been to in your life? Well, he's been successful in certain areas of the lake, and why go anywhere else when you know that that's where the good quality fish are? So I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's and I call it, it's the Brian Thrift pattern. It's called the spoke. I call it the spoke and hub pattern, right?
Yep.
So picture you have this wheel. So you're spending your practice. What you're trying to do is you're trying to find the hub of that wheel. You're trying to find you start out with nothing, and you find, and sometimes you don't ever find it, and you suck in the tournament. Sometimes you get lucky, you don't ever find it. I mean, but once you start doing it over and over, you find something that you're comfortable with. In this case, it was something I didn't expect to be comfortable with, but it was those stretches of grass. Like I felt that was my hub. Like I could go get bit there, right?
Yep.
So then you start finding spokes that come out from that hub. So this is my central pattern. This is where I feel comfortable. Like, and you can't fake it. You either know you feel comfortable or you know you're screwed. I mean, that's what it comes down to, right?
Yep.
So if you feel comfortable, you're like, okay, I got my hub. Now you start exploring little spokes. So like when I was down there in Beach. So like, okay, if this whole area, this random area is my hub, I'm going to start exploring little spokes, and it's not going to work out. It's just an hour stuck in here, 30 minutes, whatever. So now I need to start getting some spokes so I can get a wheel. Well, one of those spokes happened to be brush pile. Like in one area of the lake that I had several bites on in practice, I did the same thing in the grass. I went back, I'd cast, I'd shake them off. Or I'd catch one on a crankbait and leave and be like, okay, they're here at noon. No, I started one morning there. Okay, they're here. Because you need 5 fish a day. Like, you don't have to know the whole lake. Like, I don't know the whole lake. I have no idea on Sam Rayburn. Like, if someone was like, explain Sam Rayburn, I was like, I can explain 2 spots to you. 2 areas. You know what I mean?
Yep.
But then, like, another spoke was like, okay, I haven't had a bite for an hour and a half on these stretches of grass. I fish the same ones. I know they're here, but they're just not biting. So let's go run over and see if I can pick one off the brush piles. So like that was a spoke to it. So while I'm sucking in the grass, it keeps me calm because I know I got these brush piles that I might go get bit on.
Yep.
And then when I go to the brush piles, I'm still calm because I'm like, well, if I don't get bit here, I've given that grass a rest and I could go back and catch them out of the grass. Yeah. So basically my whole pattern was like keeping me from spinning out.
That's really good stuff. And I think that that's a different approach too that really complements your personality and your style, because if you think about how Randy prepared for the tournament, and we put that video out there, he literally said, I'm going to fish shallow, I can't compete deep. And all he's going to do is he went into the back of a creek, stuck in the back of this creek, and he was fishing cypress trees in 6 inches to a foot of water. We'll have his Rayburn video of him catching his fish once he gets back from the Hartwell Open. We'll get that video up. And he basically stuck in the back of this creek. He had 12 pounds the first day. I think he had like 8 pounds the second day, but he lost like 3, around 4 or 4.5 pounds. So he would have had a chance to be in that top 50, top 40 range just fishing shallow. Now, I talked to Randy about how I would fish this, and I made a video too preparing for this. I'm not going to post that one because I just don't feel like you guys would be as interested, but in that video, I literally said if I was going to go prepare for this tournament, I would only fish offshore the entire tournament. I would graph for 4 days straight. That's all I would do. And I would pick 4 sections of the lake for the 4 days of practice, and I would just graph. And I would figure out which area I felt like was the most productive. And I might make 200 casts all of practice and just graph and graph and graph. Because I know, kind of like what the guys who were at the top were doing, I don't care if I don't catch a fish for 7 hours offshore, because I know all it takes is hitting 3 of the right brush piles in a row, and I'm catching 20 pounds. And for me, that I never get spun out fishing offshore, because I've had so many experiences now where I go all day without catching them, and then I pull up on the spot and catch them. So I'm never concerned. I've never was concerned in tournaments. I would do that all the time for years, and I just didn't care. Like, if I didn't have a fish at 1 o'clock, it didn't matter. It was funny. I tell the story all the time, but like, there was a college when we fished the University of Arkansas College team. My first year in the club, my partner and I won Angler of the Year. We never caught a single fish before noon, and all of our weigh-ins were at 2 o'clock. And we won 3 of the 6 tournaments and never finished out of the top 3, and we won Angler of the Year. Never caught a fish before noon. And it was because we fished offshore every tournament. And I was just graphing and just looking most of the time, and it just happened in those 6 tournaments. It was so weird. But my partner, he would literally start bringing textbooks with him while I was graphing around. He was reading this. Yeah, because I'd be graphing, and I'd find them eventually. But like, it never spun me out. But for you, if you did that, I feel like you'd be a hot mess halfway through the day without a fish in the boat.
One of the things I realized, which my goal, I mean, everyone's like, well, how could you go into a tournament not expecting to win it, or not saying you're not going to win it? But like, my goal is, like, if you look back at the history of the Bassmaster Opens, the Centrals, the Easterns, take them to any lake. Like, if you catch 5 2.5 pounders, it's a decent fish. Like, that's really good at the Arkansas River. It's average at Grand. It's below average at Rayburn. But if you can just go catch 5 2.5 pounders and weigh in a limit, you are going to cash checks, you're going to be in the hunt, and you're then going to be 1 or 2 bites away from being at the top. So, like, was I willing to sacrifice bites to go out and graph that? Like, I mean, I don't know how else to say it. Like, maybe I just didn't have a big enough set like Douglas and Gleason did to put all my eggs in that basket, because I could see what the downside of that was. I wanted something to where I could be like, I got 5, I got 12 pounds, now I'm 1 bite away. Like, I would rather be 1 or 2 bites away from cashing a check at 1 o'clock than 5 bites away from having a limit at 1 o'clock. And that's the way I was looking at it in the Bassmaster Opens and in any points tournament. And then you get to the championship, or you get to a point where you have to win or be in the top 5. Well, then your decision's taken away. You don't have to fish for a limit, because it doesn't matter if you have a limit, because you're either in the championship where you win or no one remembers you, or you're in a position where you have to catch a big bag to stay alive.
Yep.
Like, everything that I do is trying to take decisions away.
Yeah.
Like, the less I think, and I feel like there's a lot of guys who overthink.
Oh, yeah.
Like, everything that I do, whether it's a one-day club tournament or a Bassmaster Open, is knowing that I have a tendency to spin out, or did. I haven't done it in like 3 or 4 years now. Like, I haven't had a spin out tournament.
Yep.
Like, you can go on the BTL YouTube channel. I mean, dude, I lost like a 6-pounder at my hand. I only had 4 at 1 o'clock, but like, I've navigated that. I understand what type of personality I am.
Yep.
I mean, dude, if you're the type of personality that can be out there at 12:30 with no fish in your live well, and you're like, dude, it's going to happen, man, I have confidence it's going to happen, then good for you. But like, I like having 12 pounds, 11 pounds in my box at that, and then going from there.
Well, it's just a style difference, too, because, like, I also know that if I try to go fish up shallow, I'm going to suck. Because, like, I'm not great at fishing shallow. So, like, that's not my skill set. And if I don't catch them offshore, I'm not going to catch them offshore, and I'm going to suck regardless. So, like, for me, it's not like I have a lot of... I don't give myself the option to have a backup. So, it's not like I feel like I'm always going to catch them. It's just a matter of... That's where I'm confident that I'm going to catch him, not that I feel like I'm always going to. And that's the difference there of, like, you have to, do that. And I mean, I'm seeing people here, they're like, man, I can't believe you did the thing in college. And it's like, it's very easy if I did that I also could have not caught a single fish and zeroed. It worked out that season. The next year I didn't win Angler of the Year. Like, it just happened that one season. It worked out that well. So, like, if you live by the sword, you die by the sword, kind of like what Randy does. He goes and fishes shallow 100%. And, like, that's it. If they're not biting him shallow, it's not happening. Where your approach is definitely more geared towards that consistency, the versatility. What you have seen, though, is you don't have as many of the top finishes, like the wins and stuff, but you also don't have as many of the bombs. Like, if you look at a Tommy Biffle, back in the day, he was first or he was not doing very hot in a lot of the events. Like, that's that swing for the fence mentality. And it's just personality and style. I don't think there's a wrong way to do it. I think it's cool that you can go all different approaches and still be successful to an extent.
Yeah, and I mean, I know, if you got people who are watching this, I mean, is your goal to win a tournament, to win a boat in a one-day event? Is it to make the championship event? I mean, it all is different. Like, I've always just been, man, you can't win it unless you get there. So that's why I really like high percentage stuff, wacky one, drop shot, flat side square bills. I've got a system. We haven't even talked about that yet. BMR squared, Bridgers, Marina, Rip Rap, and Ramps.
We're going to do a video on that for sure.
Yeah, just like stuff to get you to the end goal. Because, I mean, that's the goal. Like, you want to make the state team or you want to make the championship event. But, I mean, if you're fishing a one-day deal and 27 pounds is going to win it, and 15 pounds gets you $500, and you split it with your buddy in a team tournament, and it's $250 a piece, probably not the best strategy. But when you're investing $14,000 in it, and your goal is not to be out of it going to the next tournament, so like think of it this way: 4 Bassmaster Opens, right, Johnny?
Yep.
Let's just say 200 people there. Basically, you have to have a top 20, 25 finish average to be in contention to finish in the top 5 or 6 in the Angler of the Year. So right off the bat, you've got like 75 guys that are done. The bottom 75 guys. Like, even if you basically, unless you win like all 3 in a row, you still won't even average that, right? So Arkansas River didn't do myself any favors. 62nd place. But still in it, right?
Yep.
So now I go to Rayburn and I'm like, okay, I can't do a 62nd, but I'm still in it. I'm not one of the guys that's out of it. So I got to do a top 40.
Yep.
I ended up finishing 38th place. So now I look at it, I'm 25th in the place. I'm doing the points. I'm like, okay, well, I'm halfway through the year and now you've got over half the field done. So now you're down to like 60 guys for 4 spots. So in 2 tournaments, I'm still one of those guys. I'm still one of the bottom, but because of the decisions that I've made, I'm still in it. So now I've got to go to Neely Henry, and I've got to have a top 20, right, in 3 weeks. So by I'm going to start taking more risks as I get it. I'm going to take the risks that I feel is appropriate to keep me in it. Like, I'm not going to take a risk to completely tank there, but I've got to catch them there. So my decision-making is going to be a little bit different than it was at Sam Rayburn. Because a 50th place finish there, I'm out of it.
So here's a question for you then, Matt. When you think about this tournament trail thing, because I think this is really insightful too for guys. Like, if you're a local one-day derby fisherman, you don't need to take this approach that Matt's talking about, the kind of conservative, get a limit, get 12 pounds. Because, like, if you finish 9th, you're not making a check anyways. But what Matt's talking about is this approach is the way to get the long-term, qualifying for Angler of the Year, qualifying for the Classic or the Bassmaster Elite Series. One thing I think is really cool in that is that you're adjusting your risks as you go through. But while you're doing this, do you ever kind of think about, hey, this tournament, for example, Rayburn, this didn't play to my strengths, so I'm going to take less risks versus Neely Henry, it's going to fish to my strengths. So I know that in these 4 tournaments, I have a better chance to take a risk at these lakes this time of year versus others. Or is that not really play into it? Does it more happen off your practice and stuff?
Yeah, it just kind of bases off how comfortable I feel after practice.
Gotcha.
Like on sometimes you're like, you have that feeling like I don't have a limit, and other times you're just comfortable and you understand things and you're like, okay, but I know based on what has happened the last 4 days? I will get a keeper bite in the next 3 hours, so I'm not going to spin out. So it just kind of, so then you're more likely to take a risk if you kind of have something in your back pocket where you know, okay, something will happen in the last couple hours to where it'll bite. But if you know, like, okay, I've gone long stretches without keeper bites here, that's when you need to start kind of assessing your risk, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's really smart. I mean, it makes perfect sense because, like you said, you're still in position. And now, I mean, if you, let's say you get a 35th place finish at Neely Henry, you know at the last tournament you need, let's say, this place finish, you can just swing for the fences there. And then treat it like a, you know, more like a one-day derby style where you just go where you think the big fish are and just swing. And if you miss, I mean, it doesn't really, it does not going to affect you.
I mean, dude, I mean, let's be honest. I mean, I'm not like I'm saying I have this like perfected magic thing. Yeah. I'm just saying what works for me. I mean, you just look at my finishes. I mean, I've kept consistently, you know, checked for the last 3 or 4 years at a state and a regional level on multiple lakes across the country, kind of doing the same thing. But like, I mean, by no means do I have like this thing figured out. It's just you start noticing certain patterns and certain things that you consistently do on different bodies of water that allow you to feel comfortable, and like you start doing the same things on different bodies of water and you never end up with difficult decisions, if that makes sense. Because I feel like there's tons of guys who are like, you know, if I'm fishing and I'm thinking about the next spot or where I need to go or what I need to do, like, dude, I'm so screwed. And I know it, and you don't even realize it at the time, but you look back on it and you're like spending all your time thinking about what you're doing next. Even when you're not catching them, when you're comfortable, you just do it. Like you're there. It might not work out or something like that, but you don't have that angst. You don't end up driving down the lake going, oh my gosh, am I going to miss out something on here by going here? It just happens naturally, and that's something you can't force. And I feel like I've put myself in that bind less and less the more that I've kind of figured out how to practice and pinpoint what jacks with my head and how to alleviate that pressure during practice. So it might not be like that for your viewers and people watching this. It might be something totally different. It might be like, you know what, I'm not going to fish for a limit, and I'm only going to fish out deep. Or it might be, you know, it's all sorts of different stuff. It's like I'm going to sample everything and maybe not catch them very good doing anything, but then whatever first thing comes into my mind tournament morning, that's what I'm going to do. It's just totally different. What I'm saying is, like, realize what your weaknesses are and then figure out how to eliminate those weaknesses during your 3 days of practice.
I think that's really, really smart. And it's really comes down to learning your personality and what makes you successful. Because I feel like from listening to Bass Talk Live the last 2-3 years, I feel like you've really come a long way in learning yourself more than anything. And I think that you know what makes you successful, what situations are good, what situations are bad. And you are able to also explain that really, really well. And I think that for the audience, that's important. It's not just, man, I didn't catch him today because I wasn't throwing the right bait in the right area. A lot of times it's you didn't game plan. It's the mental side of it that definitely, just by listening to you are definitely getting that down a lot more than I think a lot of anglers, and you're thinking about a lot more than a lot of other anglers are. And I know there's a lot of guys at the top who maybe they don't think about it at all. They just go fishing and they just catch them, and it's like, oh, why worry about that? But that's not everyone. So I think it's very helpful for a lot of guys.
That's like no one, dude. No, like even the guys who you think are like that. Okay, take like a Brandon Polinick, for example. Yeah. The dude fished like 300 days a year when the time he was 16 to 20. He has 15 years of experience for a weekend guy that he crammed into 3 years. So the guy's 20 years old, but he did from 17 to 20, and he was able to build on it because he was put day after day after day instead of weekend, not do it for a couple weeks, then another weekend. So you take the time on the water that he had from 17 to 20 years old when he was traveling around, it's literally what a hardcore weekend guy does in 15 years.
Yeah.
So they're like, oh, he's natural. No, it's time on the water. There's literally nothing that does it. And time on the water helps your mental game. Like, what's Kevin Van Dam's adage? He says it's all about the attitude. What's Iaconelli say? Fish the moment. You listen to any of Brandon's stuff. Like, any of those guys who are good, like, dude, how many people do you know who can cast as good as you, Johnny? There's thousands.
Yep.
there's that I mean, yeah, I might not be able to cast a crankbait as far as KVD, but like mechanically, like, I mean, I can flip, I can pitch, I can skip, I can cast. Why are those guys like winning and all that stuff? It's not because they're making, minute color changes or can do stuff better than a lot of other people. It's 100%. They understand what makes them tick.
Yep, for sure. Well, Matt, we're going to take a quick break here for a second. I want to talk about some stuff with the viewers, but while we're doing that, can you pull up Lake Cumberland? So I want to kind of talk about how you did over there last time, because it's really cool with what you did. Basically, you were able to use a similar method where you focus on a small section of the lake to catch those fish, as opposed to trying to go fish all over the place. And it's kind of similar to what you did on Rayburn. So I think that's really, really cool. So let's have you pull that up. But then I'm actually going to talk to you guys really quick about some stuff that we have on fishthemoment.com. We always do this at some point through the stream. And just want to let you guys know about some of the products we're offering. This is obviously what I do for a living with Randy, and we're actually offering some virtual seminars coming up. They've been really popular. The first one coming up here is the Advanced Jerkbait Fishing Seminar from Randy. He's going to be talking about when, where, and how to fish jerkbaits, and he is a jerkbait master. He actually, did you know he helped design the Vision 110 jerkbait, Matt?
No, I did not.
Yeah, so he was sending the original Smithwick Rogues over to Megabass in Japan, went over to Japan and helped design that bait. So he knows all about the Vision 110. And he is so good at jerkbait fishing, especially in the fall and the winter. And he's doing a seminar on that. We're going to be showing you the best areas, retrieves, conditions, techniques, super in-depth. There's only 30 spots available, and I think there are only 5 spots left in the seminar. So definitely check that one out. I'm also going to be doing an advanced bass fishing, offshore bass fishing seminar, where I'm going to be getting into how to become a more efficient and effective offshore angler in terms of how to rotate offshore spots to hit those feeding windows effectively, how to maybe not lose confidence if you go 4 or 5 hours without catching fish offshore, and how to pay attention to the conditions to set yourself up for success, as well as also finding some of those hidden offshore areas that are a little bit off the wall. Something that I am really big nerd on. I spent all my time focusing on offshore fishing and how to catch them offshore, so something that I feel like I can definitely help you guys out with, so check that out. And I'm also going to be doing an advanced bass fishing electronics seminar on November 12th. I've done 3 of these so far. They always fill up 2 weeks ahead of time, so I wanted to throw this out way out ahead for you guys. Sign up if you want to, learn about electronics with me. I know you guys watch my videos. I'm really good with the electronics, side imaging, down imaging, stuff like that, so I can definitely help you out there. Or at least I think I am. You can watch my videos and check for yourself. And then also for the other guys, if you have a tournament coming up in the fall, or you're just struggling to find fish, we also offer Fish the Moment map breakdowns, where we actually mark up maps with 60 different spots on lakes all across the country by season, and we give you 4 different areas of the lake to test out. And these are all created by Randy Blockett, 30-year tour veteran. And if you guys do want to check those out, just head to fishthemoment.com. Awesome. So I just wanted to throw that out there. And then otherwise, let's head over to Matt again. And let me switch back over to you. There we go. Cool. So, Matt, tell us a little bit about Lake Cumberland. You kind of used your hub and spoke method on Cumberland to explain what's going on, and I think that it was very similar in a sense to what you did in Veach, and I want you to explain how that happened, because you were really successful at Cumberland. I think you had a top 3?
Yeah, I finished third place. Championship awesome. Last year. Had never been there before, so I did the same similar thing. I wanted to establish before I went there an area that I felt had the winning fish in it. We're talking about championship event here, so this is for all the marbles, right? So I talked to a buddy who lived down there, and he gave me 3 or 4 creeks, and they were from the lower end all the way to the upper end of it, and we took out a bird side. So I what do I feel most comfortable with? Grand Lake. So, we took out a burnside way up here. This is a river fishery. It is like 55 miles long. So I started looking at how past tournaments had been won. Brian Thrift, Wenlet, when he was leading that tournament, a lot of this stuff. And I realized I would be most comfortable on this lower end. I'm not going to fish mud flats. I fish for largemouth in the back, plus smallmouth are cool, and I like doing that type of stuff. So I put in it at the dam the first day of practice. This is crazy because this is actually how this worked out. Put it right here at the dam, right? You see the dam right here?
Yep.
And I went over into Indian Creek. And I went to the back of Indian Creek. And there were like 20 boats back there, and they were all largemouth fishing. And I said, well, this is not going to work because I had in my mind, here's what I see. You go to the back of a creek, 5 days, people have been blasting them. There ain't going to be any resident fish back there.
Yep.
So I start working my way out on the first day of practice, and I get short of this marina here, and I'm like, I know they catch them on a rock crawler, wigglewort, that type of stuff, and I have like 3 or 4 big smallmouth eat it on rock bluff. So I go back and I refish it in practice, like really fish it hard, and I catch like 4 or 5. I have like 18 pounds of smallmouth off of a couple different stretches back here. But I'm learning why. I mean, it's 5 days before the tournament. So for the next 4 days, I went a little bit into, I think this is Beaver Creek over here. And Otter, like I went a little bit into these 2 creeks and just a hair into, I don't ever remember it being called Greasy Creek.
Greasy
That's
Creek.
what it's called there. I don't remember it being called that. Jamestown is what I remember it being called.
Gotcha.
I spent a couple hours in there. I pretty much spent 5 days in Indian Creek. So I developed my hub right there where I had like 5 or 6 different stretches. And I figured out when it was sunny, they need the translucent bait better than the hard red bait. Now, I'm like catching the right caliber of fish. I'm not like jacking on them in here. I'm just fishing a bunch of different stuff. I'd go back and just hit like a 10-yard stretch that I thought, and if I caught one, I'd be good. So then I was like, okay, I got to find something else in here. So now I start looking for spokes, right? Yep. So my hub is, I'm making this long run. So I found my hub. My hub is down here. I don't really care about any of this part of the lake. So much so that the first time I saw anything from Burnside all the way to Jamestown was the first morning of the tournament when I ran past all of it down to Indian Creek. And as it turns out, tons of guys stayed up here, fished up here. It made top 10s up here. I had no idea what was up there. I don't have any idea, still don't have any idea what's up there because I just drove past it 3 times. Well, 2, my boat broke down on the 3rd day, so Rob Burns drove past it the 3rd day. So I got my hub here, so now I start looking for spokes. I know they got spotted bass. Spotted bass like to be around Cumberland and stuff, so I start looking in creeks. I find this little cut right here. There's like a sunken barge in the middle of it. Always had fish on it. I checked it every single day. Now here's the thing I realized. Sometimes it had 12-inch spotted bass on it. Sometimes it had 3-pound smallmouth on it. Sometimes it had largemouth on it. I ended up catching a key fish there all 3 days of the tournament. The only reason I had the confidence to go back was because I never knew what would be on it because I'd fished it for 5 days. Now I wasn't catching them on it. I had a screw-in block. I wasn't hooking the fish. But I could tell whether they were, a little spot or big fish or whatnot. So that was a little bit. So then when I started to come out on the main lake, I saw, so now I'm looking for stuff like in this general area that's spokes because my hub is going to be cranking right in here. I think I can do 15 to 17 a day cranking. And I find like little blowdowns on the main river channels. So like right out in here, wherever that channel, this little bank right here, this little bank right here, this little bank right here, and there'd be like trees that were falling down in the water, like the bigger spotted bass would be in those trees. I just pitch a drop shot up there. I caught like a 3-pounder on it the first day that really helped, and I filled or the second day, and I filled my limit out with it on the first day, and then the final day I had a chance to win, and I thought I had a better chance with smallmouth, so I didn't do it at all. But so Had my hub was cranking down there. Had no decisions to make because I didn't spend any time on this massive 55-mile fishery of what to do. So I had one decision, which was drive 55 miles down there, crank, do a little bit of the spoke stuff if I needed to, and then drive all the way back. And that's how I fished that whole tournament.
That's awesome. Well, it's very similar to what you did in Veach as well, because you found
100%.
Those schools, and I think that that's something that I've been learning more and more over the last 3 or 4 years, is that there are 200-yard stretches to a mile stretch where just there's a better population of active bass living. And if you can get in that section, for whatever reason, you can just go in there and, regardless of the conditions, whether it's windy, cloudy, you can find a way to get those fish to bite. And then if you can expand and find every little nook, every rock transition, brush pile, whatever, you can catch them in there. And you can fish the rest of that creek and not hardly catch anything. The biggest challenge, though, is obviously finding the hub. Yeah. And you got fortunate in this tournament where you found it in the first day, but it might take you 4 or 5 days to find it at times. Does that sound right?
Right, absolutely. Now, here's the deal. When this works and you find it, it's very manageable. There's low stress. You know what you're going to do. You have no decision to make. When you don't find it and your plan going into that tournament is this strategy, total cluster. Because now you don't have anything.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? Like, I mean, dude, I finished 100 and something at Amistad last year. I finished like 80th, 90th at Lake of the Ozarks. Dude, I never found a hub. Yep. Like, I never found that deal I was comfortable with. So what do I have to work on? What's my weakness? Like a big-time weakness that a guy like a Gerald Swindle or someone that has been there and done that for 20 more years, like knows, like, okay, this is what I can do to go get bites when I don't have any pattern whatsoever. Like, I'm still trying to figure out when I don't find the hub, when I don't have a home base or a comfort zone, like, how do I still survive those tournaments?
Yeah. When you're looking
for that, I mean, that's why, you know, that's why those guys are the best in the world, because they figure out how to survive those tournaments.
For sure. And when you're looking for that hub, then are you purposely going to the tournament saying, hey, I'm going to check a lot of different areas to find that 200-yard to a mile stretch? Or is it just that you're going to go to areas where you know that traditionally the tournaments are won at, or where like fish?
I'm going to do a lot of research. So, dude, I've been in the industry for 15 years. I pretty much know guys who are around different areas, right? So I'm going to talk to as many guys, as long as it's legal and it's in practice, that I know who know the lake. I'm going to say, give me some generals. Like, if you were to pick, this is exactly how I'll do it, man. If you were to pick the safest section of the lake that you feel confident at this time of year you can do whatever weight the target on is, 13 to 15 pounds or 10 to 12 pounds, and not have to run anywhere else, what section of the lake is that going to be? If you talk to 2 or 3 different guys, you'll find they start overlapping, right? And then you start pulling BFL results and tournament results, and you start looking at like other websites that have any sort of results, and you start putting it all together, and then all of a sudden you realize, okay, this is a fertile section of the lake that historically plays. So the odds are that there's going to be a solid bite in this section of the lake. And then that's the part of the lake that I'm going to go focus on. I don't like to get tons of waypoints, or if I do, so I'll tell you, if I do, I'll say, give me 2 waypoints in here that just kind of explain what this area is, right?
Yep.
That give me confidence. So I can go to it and say, okay, even if there's not fish there now, this is an area that they historically set up on, that they've been caught on before, whether it's a stretch of bank or something offshore or a brush pile, the way it sets up. And that just gives me an idea right there.
Yep.
So now I know I'm in a productive area of the lake looking at something that the fish historically live on. And then you can build from there.
That's really cool stuff. And then once you get into those areas, are you testing a lot of different patterns as well? Shallow, deep?
Yeah, tons. I'm using stuff to get bites. Now I'm trying to get bites. That's why I'm a big like wacky worm guy, drop shot, 1.0s, stuff that gets bites. Like, I'm not going to just go lob a negotiator out there and be like, oh, well, no 8-pounders. Like, I'm trying to get bites, because remember what I said before, like, a lot of these 80% of these tournaments that I'm fishing, I'm trying to catch a solid limit, because a solid limit puts you way in the top percentage and keeps you in it for the next tournament.
Gotcha. And that's
whether that, that's a shaky head. If it's your confidence bait's a shaky head, a square bill, whatever it is, whatever, based on the type of stuff that you're fishing. But I'm putting something in that more often than not is going to get a bite.
Well, and that's one thing that I've talked about before is, like, when I think those fish that we talked about those feeding windows earlier in the stream, if you hit those feeding windows right, like that first day you were back in that creek on Cumberland, you just wrecked him on the crankbait. That might have just been you hit the timing right when they were up actively
Front
feeding.
Came in, it started raining sideways. No one else was back there. If you go back and watch my video, it's actually on the AFCO YouTube channel. If you watch that first day of practice, it was like gnarly, and I was the only one cranking bluffs in Indian Creek that day. And then it got tough, but like I saw what the potential was there. I mean, I had like 19 to 20 pounds on that first day of practice, and I build on it. Yep. Then it got sunny and slick and stuff, but I was looking ahead at the weather. So I had build on that because I saw what the potential was and how they sat on the stuff.
Yeah, and
it was lucky.
Well, but at the same time, you hit that feeding window right, and you were using the right bait at the right time. At the same time, though, I always talk about, like, if let's say there's a feeding window right before that front at noon, and then at 5 o'clock, there's another feeding window right before the sun goes down. In between there, I feel like those fish maybe aren't as aggressive, and if you go through there with a crankbait, you might get one bite or get a fish to push it or follow it, but you might not actually catch them. The way I think about it is kind of like, let's say that you're going, it's a Sunday, and you are eating lunch at noon, and then you eat lunch at 5 o'clock. So you had your after church meal, you ate up, and you're full, and then you're going to eat maybe something before you start watching football. But in between there, maybe there's some games on you want to watch, and if I come by with a Kit Kat bar for you in the middle of that time, there's a pretty good chance you're going to eat that because you're like, oh, I'll take a Kit Kat. That's how I think about a drop shot and a shaky head. It's like you're giving them that bait that maybe they want to eat a crankbait or a jig or something like that when they're in that feeding mode, but when they're not, the drop shot, the shaky head gives them that kind of little taste. And that's where you can dial in those areas. If you're not in a good feeding window, throwing those baits as your search baits can actually be effective, despite the fact that maybe you wouldn't want to throw those tournament day, but you're searching with a finesse bait, which I think is very different from what a lot of people do. They think search baits, crankbaits, spinner baits, jigs. They don't think, when I'm looking for fish, throw the most finessey thing you can get away with.
But here's the thing. I like to throw a drop shot, a Ned Rig, and I don't really throw a shaky head a ton anymore, but a drop shot, a Ned Rig, but I'll have the trolling motor on like 7 or 8.
Yeah, exactly.
Hitting high percentage stuff. I'm not like sitting there crawling. I'm like covering water with it. That happened at the Arkansas River. I was power fishing.
Yep.
I was like, dude, I know these fish are here this past weekend. Pulled a drop shot out. 7 of the 10 I weighed in came on a drop shot with a 6-inch leader and a 6-inch worm.
It's not fishing any different from how you normally would. It's just changing your baits because you're catching those inactive fish as well as the active fish. And if you can even get those bites, if you come back in that area again when that feeding window's on, pre-front or whatever, then you can smash them. But if you can get 3 bites, kind of like in Veach area, you got maybe 1 or 2 bites on a stretch of grass. Well, maybe they were just 12 inchers, but then when you actually go out the next day, if you hit it at the right time, those 2 12-inchers turn into 3 4-pounders.
Yeah, I guess I can like kind of summarize everything. Like, I feel, and this is just me. Like, I mean, I've fished tournaments since I was 14. Like I said, I suck in a lot of them. I'm not on the Elite Series. I'm doing decent in the Opens. I had a decent year last year. I'm not saying this is the end all be all, Johnny, of how things are done. I'm just saying how it works for me.
Yeah.
But like, if I have to try to convince myself that I've got a pattern going or that I'm doing the right thing, like, if you have to try to talk yourself into that you've got something going, typically not going to end well.
Yeah.
And you need to keep searching. And it's really easy to do that because you can look back and be like, oh, I had a 4-pounder there and I caught him there. Like, man, I've done good. Like, if you have to convince yourself that you're going to catch him, you're not going to catch him.
Yep.
And that's I think one of the things that you have to get your butt kicked for several years and fish a lot of tournaments, going into tournaments with that feeling, to realize like, okay, I need to adjust it, because I've gone into enough now where, like, here's another key. If I'm at the dock and there's other guys loading at the end of the day, and I'm like looking over to see what they have tied on, even if I caught them, I'm not gonna catch them.
Yeah.
Because I care what they have tied on. Like, literally, when I have a good pattern, a spoke and a hub, and I'm confident and I know what's going on, I'm not sitting there going, am I going to catch him? Am I going to not? I'm literally just going, okay, let's make sure my batteries are charged. Let's make sure everything works right. The trolling motor, let's make sure there's no nicks in the line, that the hooks are super. That's all I'm worried about. I'm not worried about where I'm starting or what I'm doing. And when I'm pulling up to load the boat, I'm typically putting all my rods away, and I really don't care what anyone else has tied on, because I think I can catch them on what I've got, and I don't want to put something else in my head. So those are two like good kind of litmus tests for me as to whether I'm trying to convince myself and whether I'm not trying to convince myself.
That's really good stuff. And I think that there's a lot of guys in the chat here who are agreeing with kind of, or at least they really appreciate your opinion.
I haven't seen any of the chat. Maybe they're just like, dude, shut this guy.
No, they're loving it. They're saying I'm too cocky, but other than that, that's all.
That I am, or that you are?
That I am. Apparently me talking about my college wins is not going over well with the audience. But
you're living in the past, Johnny.
Live in the past. You gotta fish the moment, live the moment. But otherwise, other than that, but yeah, the Dan Ham says here, eliminating options and decisions is an awesome concept. Eliminating areas, methods, and baits seems daunting. Matt's idea just seems much more doable. And I think that is very true, especially because, like, for myself, when I'm not fishing tournaments now, I'm planning on getting back into some tournament stuff, fish some opens, maybe stuff like that. Right. But I fished 130 tournaments before the age of 20. So I fished a lot of tournaments. I also sucked a lot. And I lost a lot, and I learned a lot of lessons in that, which then led me to, when I was doing like my college stuff, I was able to have, like you said, that clear mind. Where if you only have fished 10, 15, 20 tournaments in your life, and you haven't fished for more than maybe 3 or 4 years, there's so many options. And every single time you pull up YouTube video, it's like, oh, here's how I catch them on a flutter spoon or a swim bait or whatever. And it's like, what am I supposed to do? And I've got to the point where when I go out fishing nowadays, I basically try to catch them on a jig, a crankbait, and a worm. And that's it. If I can catch them on like a shaky head, like Neko rig, drop shot, or on a jig or a crankbait, I'm going to catch them. If I'm not catching them on one of those baits, then either I stumbled on something and got lucky, or I am way off base and I'm not going to catch them. And that's something that probably is similar for you. I know you have confidence baits as well, and it's just, you don't know what a confidence bait is until you spend a lot of time doing it. But if you can maybe block out all the noise and maybe stop watching every YouTube video about every single technique and dial in those few techniques you really enjoy, it might help you become a little bit better fisherman. Maybe, observe the techniques, but maybe not have to go out and implement every single one. Because, of all the available techniques, Matt, how many do you use on a monthly basis? Like, how many different styles of techniques would you use?
Not many.
Yeah.
Not many.
It's the same here.
Like I said, this Rayburn was so unique because it was the first time that I punched grass. Now, dude, I'd flipped and stuff before. It's not like I'd never seen grass. I've been out with guys and covered tournaments and all that stuff. It was the first time that I had, and I missed fish, and I'm sure I made some mistakes, but it worked out. But as a whole, man, it's stuff you develop confidence in, and especially if you're new and you're just getting into it, like, do some research, figure out what's typically good, and figure out like how to throw it and stuff. Don't just stick with, I know how to Texas rig a worm. Like, get a good repertoire that you feel comfortable with, and then and start exploring it first. And then all of a sudden you'll be like, I really like that, or I really like this, and then you can go down the YouTube wormhole and learn all about it and spend time on the water. But pond fish, catch fish on a number of different things, figure out what you like, stick with it, eliminate your options. Go to the Cumberland map again. Yep. Dude, it's the first year I fished it. We take out here, I've got all this. How the hell am I going to beat Brian Thrift on this body of water? How am I going to beat Troy Morrow? Dude, I know it's going to take 15 to 17 to win this thing. I had 15 to 17 pounds of bites down here. I don't care what Brian Thrift and Troy Morrow were doing here with a 3.3-inch Kitech on a spinning rod on 45-degree angle bluffs and chasing schooling fish and flat fish. Dude, I can compete right here in this little thing, not knowing anything about the rest of the entire lake.
Yep.
That's all it comes down to. And anybody can too.
Yep. And pick up those confidence baits. Pick up your Carolina rigs, your spooks, and just go fishing. And what else do you need to throw? Take the Jeffries approach on it.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, Matt, this is super, super good stuff. I mean, I think everyone on the stream seems to be really loving it. One thing that someone suggested here, Dave Dalton, says he really would be interested to see how you actually break down the lake. And one thing that I plan on doing, guys, going forward, I know a lot of you guys really enjoy when I used to do my live streams where I just literally pulled up a lake map of random lakes and just started breaking down the lakes, talking about where, when, how to fish. I plan on doing that here every single week going forward. Every Tuesday, we're going to be bringing back the live stream, and we're going to be doing that format. And I'm actually going to be using my Patreon members to suggest the lakes. I'm going to be picking 2 lakes every single week for the live stream. And I'm going to have myself breaking them down, Randy and Matt, if you want to come back, I think we'd love to have you maybe show us how to break down the lake. We can just pull up a random lake map and show, maybe how you find fish in the fall on Clark's Hill.
Guy at breaking down.
Hey, we can learn. I think we can learn from everyone. I think people would enjoy it.
All right.
But we will see. But I think that'd be really fun. And in general, I think that in fishing, you can't get enough opinions. There's no one who knows everything. It's just, I've made that clear in my videos. Like, I am terrible at shallow water fishing. I feel like I'm really good at offshore fishing in certain situations. Randy is really good at shallow water fishing in a lot of situations, but he doesn't know the offshore game. And Matt, you have a really good perspective on the mental side and the approach of these tournaments. So, there's things that you can learn that I feel like everyone has a pretty good grasp on. And the more and more we can learn from others, I think is really important. So definitely get as much information as you can from other people. I learned just as much from talking to a 15 or 13-year-old kid that I might go fishing with, because they might fish a certain bait a way that I've never seen it, as I can from a tour pro a lot of times, just because I have an open mind. So definitely keep an open mind on all this. Listen to what Matt has to say, because it is super valuable information, and I'm going to start adopting a lot of this stuff too. And we're going to be talking about the hub and spoke. I think we'll make a dedicated video on that, Matt, as well as
you're gonna start sucking a lot more if you start listening to everything like that too.
No, it's good. It's good stuff.
Like I said, that's the problem that I'm trying to figure out, and I don't have a solution to it. Because when you miss it, you really miss it.
Yeah.
Like, there is no salvaging. Like, you see what what I'm saying there?
Yeah. Well, one question.
As I said, that's part 2. That's the next scenario. Once I figure out how to miss it, once you don't figure out the hub and spoke deal, then we'll actually be cooking. Then we'll be able to go places.
Well, we'll keep tabs with you on that too to see how you figure that out. I think that would be interesting. One question from JD. He says, in the past tournaments that you've won in practice, did you have a good feeling that you were going to win, or no? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I thought I could win Cumberland. Like, I actually said it's in the video that I did. I was like, dude, I'd be really disappointed if I didn't do well here. I haven't won many big tournaments. Let's alter that to say solid finishes. Okay? Yeah. I've rarely had a solid finish out of nowhere. Like, I've always had something that kind of clicked.
Gotcha.
Like, I haven't had... I have in the past, deals where it just is brutal all day and your stuff doesn't work. You pull up on a bridge with 5 minutes left and catch 12 pounds on 3 drops. That's happened. But as a whole, a good finish against a strong field, you rarely get lucky.
Yeah.
Because there's enough talent that outweighs the luck. You might have a lucky fish or 2, but that's the difference between a 30th and a top 10 finish.
Yep.
It's really hard to go in and get lucky and go from a 90th place finish to a check.
And just to kind of context that, you're talking about like open level tournaments, multi-day tournaments. You're not talking about like a BFL jack or BFLs are even tough to win, but
Yeah, like a
of
club
jackpot
tournament.
or like a just a whatever. Yeah, those are
Yeah.
different. I would say
I'm
it's the
talking
same.
about a tournament you've prepared for, you've done research, you've put a game plan together, you've really have a vested interest in this tournament. Those are the type of tournaments I'm talking about.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, anyone can go out and win a $30 jackpot tournament by just pulling up on the bank and getting lucky. It's hard to be consistently
Multi-day
good
tournaments with a high-caliber angler.
Exactly. Yeah. But no, this is super interesting stuff, Matt. I just really appreciate you joining me for the stream. I think that we got a lot of good information out of this. I need to go back and take some notes on this because I have some stuff I'm thinking about with this whole like hub and spoke and like I need to figure some of this stuff out. I'm going to talk to you after the stream and we'll figure this out too. But you have some really cool ideas, and I think that really appreciate everything you share on Bass Talk Live. You and Jeffries do a great job there interviewing the pros, and you always have really, really good discussions. So thanks so much for all that work, and also on the
I'm
Bass
just
Zone,
saying,
too.
if your listeners are good with Randy's theories, they could sure handle some of my abstract theories. And I say that as a compliment. Randy is one of my favorite guests on BTL, and I don't know, does he even drink a beer? Like, would he sit down and drink a beer? I don't know if he's a...
I don't even know, actually. We haven't
Anyway, he's a guy that I would love to
Yeah.
sit down and drink a cold glass of sweet tea with and discuss some stuff, off camera, because I really like getting into that kind of mental aspect of it.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Well, guys, again, thanks for joining for the stream. One last deal. Just want to make sure we drop a plug in at the end. You got to plug stuff. We don't have the fancy commercials you guys have at BTL.
All right.
Just a reminder that we do have some virtual seminars coming up here, guys. We got the Advanced Jerkbait Seminar from Randy on October 8th. He's going to go through the best conditions, the best structure, areas, everything you know about jerkbait fishing. I'm excited to watch this because I suck at jerkbait fishing, so I'm excited to be moderating on this. And then we're going to be doing an advanced offshore bass fishing class with me on October 22nd, where we're talking about how to become a more efficient and effective offshore angler. Kind of focus more for those tournament guys who are maybe struggling to consistently do well offshore, and maybe you're hitting your timing wrong, you're not finding enough spots in a day, maybe you're not adapting to conditions. I'm going to be talking about all the factors that are going to change how the fish bite, from weather conditions, sun angles, the current flow, fishing pressure, how all those things affect the fish, and how you can become a really efficient and effective offshore angler. And then we also have an advanced bass fishing electronics class coming up November 12th. And I'll be going through how to actually use your side imaging, down imaging 2D sonar to determine if fish are on a spot, if they're actively feeding, and if you should even make a cast there. I've got to the point recently where I'm graphing for 5-6 hours a day, and I'm only fishing for 2 hours out of my day. And I'm like 100, 150 casts, and I'm catching 30 fish. So that's a pretty good percentage of casts to catch, but it's a lot of graphing. And I think that if you guys check out this class, it'll definitely help you become a more efficient electronics fisherman if you're into that kind of stuff. So those are some of the classes, and that's all for that. So anyways, again, thanks, Matt, for joining me tonight, and definitely tune in to Bass Talk Live again. It is on the Apple Podcast app, Spotify, pretty much everywhere you can find your podcasts. Just go to Bass Talk Live. Matt and Mark Jeffries, they are really, really great interviewers and just really interesting guys to listen to while you're driving to the lake, stuff like that. And also check out BassZone.com. Matt does a lot of great work there, articles, just good way to keep up with tournament bass fishing if you have some time where you just want to learn stuff about bass fishing. So again, Matt, thanks so much for joining me on the stream.
Thanks,
and
Johnny.
Hopefully we can have you back on. Hope we didn't scare you away from the stream.
No, I hope I didn't scare everyone else away.
Good stuff. Well, anyways, thanks again, guys, and have a great night.